Celtic in Person, Volume 3, Alec McNair, Part 2, 1908-09. By the summer of 1908, Alec McNair was firmly established as a footballer of distinction. A 24-year-old internationalist, it was hard to think of Celtic without the Icicle, whose cool presence in any part of the half-back line or at full-back was a fixture in Willie Maley's all-conquering side. He had not yet made the right-back position his own, but, no matter the occasion, a place was always found for him. A utility player he may still have been, but you could only be sure of your place if Alec McNair was needed somewhere else. McNair's assured defensive excellence would be needed more than ever in the new season. The shock of Alec Bennett's defection to Rangers in May 1908 didn't stop Celtic in their tracks as they headed for a record 6 championships in a row, but it did mark the beginning of the end of the fabulously talented team Maley had assembled in the first decade of the 20th century. Bennett had been the idol of the Celtic support with good reason. His pace, close control and pinpoint crossing from the right wing were almost impossible to replace, not to mention his potent goal-scoring threat. He was also a more than adequate replacement at centre-forward for Jimmy Quinn whenever he was unavailable. Many a time in the previous 5 years, Bennett had saved or won matches with important and timely strikes. The wounds of his departure were still raw in August as he prepared to display his prowess for a new, expensively assembled Rangers team. As usual, the football season at Celtic Park was preceded by the Celtic sports meetings, which were drawing record attendances to the ground for athletics and cycling events, which it was claimed dwarfed the attendances at that summer's Olympic Games held in London. The Scottish referee reported on the 10th of August 1908. "It was the Celtic FC who in 1896 and 1898 gave us our first record as to attendances at our football internationals, and so now they are to hand with a record for an athletic and cycling sports meeting of 40,000 persons. The significance of this record, and its value as Scottish, is immensely increased when we consider that the World's Olympiad in London, the latter with its vast population, could only draw a quarter of this number, and sometimes much less. Whilst Londoners have been twitted on their non-appreciation of athletics, Glaswegians are to be highly complimented, and if, at a future date, the World's Olympiad were to be held in St Mungo, why then, after Saturday's experience, we have confidence in predicting a record attendance possibly equal to that established at New Hampden in football last April, when 120,452 persons witnessed the international with England. Whilst this expectation as to the future is to be realised, the present is potent with facts and records which clearly demonstrate that this is a record age for the public's appreciation of sport." It would be 70 years or more into the future before the dawn of the age of the replica football kit and the commercialisation which sees clubs bringing out new kits every season. Events which are waited on with almost as much excitement amongst fans as speculation over new signings, and are often greeted with as much disappointment when they arrive. But even in 1908, if you so wished, you could buy your club's kit from certain retailers. The Scottish referee also carried an advert that day, which brings an impression of a dispute between rival Glasgow stores over who exactly was providing strips for Celtic. The advert, taken out by F.A. Lumley's athletic stores of 80 and 82 Sauchiehall Street, read in part, "We are the oldest established and cheapest house in the trade. Our leading lines are still the envy of all our opponents. A few of them have earned a worldwide reputation for value and quality. Don't forget, we are the International Outfitters, the only firm in the trade that have made and supplied Lord Rosebery's colours, the classic primrose and pink, to the SFA, by whom we have been honoured, after open competition with all the other firms in the trade, with the orders for all outfits required for the international matches last season. We also had the privilege of supplying the world-renowned green and white jerseys worn by the Celtic football team in the finals of all the cup ties and league matches won by them during season 1907-8, viz. The Scottish Cup, the Scottish League, the Glasgow Cup, the Glasgow Charity Cup. If your ambition is to be an international player, or for your club to win the Scottish Cup, pay us a visit." Lumley's had made a similar claim in an advert in the Scottish Referee of Monday the 3rd of August 1908, but in the Friday edition on the 7th of August, T.R. Charlton Athletic Outfitters of 20 and 101 Argyle Street had taken out an advert reading, "Facts, facts, truth, truth." The green and white jerseys worn by the Celtic football team last season, and for several seasons previously, were supplied by T.R. Charlton, Athletic Outfitter, 20 and 101 Argyle Street, Glasgow. The excellent value and quality of our football goods are so well known that they require no puffy advertisements. Send for our illustrated catalogue, sent post-free. For honest value and straightforward dealing, T.R. Charlton, 20 and 101 Argyle Street, Glasgow. Whichever athletic outfitter it was who did in fact supply the Celtic kit for season 1908-09, the players wore it for the first match of the season on the 15th of August 1908 in Greenock, the defence of the League Championship and the pursuit of a record 5th title in a row beginning at Capello against Morton. Minus the injured Alec McNair, they opened the campaign with a 5-0 win, Jimmy Quinn scoring 4, the other coming from Jimmy McMenemy. On the day, Alec Bennett made a scoring debut for Rangers against Port Glasgow Athletic, who played most of the match with 10 men in a 7-0 win at Ibrox. It seemed as though Celtic were all set to carry on their imperious form from the previous 2 seasons, when the following week Kilmarnock were beaten 5-1 at Celtic Park, with Quinn scoring twice, another strike for McMenemy, and 2 goals for Bennett's replacement, Dan Munro. Playing for Kilmarnock that afternoon was former Celt Bobby Templeton, who had joined Kilmarnock shortly after being a regular for the Celtic team that won the first League and Scottish Cup double in Scotland in season 1906-07. The Scotland internationalist hurried back to Kilmarnock after the match, to Bostock and Wombwell's menagerie, where for a £10 bet he had an appointment to keep with a lion. The Ardrossan and Saltcoats Herald recorded on the 28th of August 1908. In the Lion's Den. At the close of the Kilmarnock Celtic game on Saturday, Bobby Templeton hurried back to town and appeared in a new role in Bostock and Wombwell's menagerie. In the presence of a crowded house, the left winger, for a £10 wager, coolly entered the cage of a lion. He patted the lion and calmly turned its tail amid the plaudits of the audience. Messrs Bostock and Wombwell presented Templeton with a gold medal for his courage. Several thought it was no great feat, but probably these were the people who ran so hard when a lion escaped in the old cattle market a few years ago. With 10 goals scored for the loss of only 1 in 2 matches, Celtic looked well set for the following week's visit to Dens Park, for what was always a tough match against Dundee. Before then, though, Peter Summers became the latest Celt to be honoured with a benefit match in midweek, and as had happened so many times before for players like Johnny Madden and Willie Loney, Rangers provided the opposition. Cold and wet weather kept the crowd to a modest 4,000, and it was noted as a huge disappointment to those in attendance that Alec Bennett was not in the Rangers team. It was a shame that a bigger crowd didn't turn out for a great servant to Celtic, who defeated their opponents 3-1, with goals from recent signing Robbie Sanderson and 2 from Willie Kivlikin. Former Celtic player Robert Campbell netted a late consolation for Rangers. The gate raised around £100 for Summers. In the Celtic lineup were 2 trialists. Glover of Dundee St Joseph's was described by the Dundee Courier of the 27th of August 1908 as the best half on the Celtic side, and he is sure to be signed by them. Glover was indeed signed and enjoyed a brief Celtic career, but the other, a youngster by the name of Joe Dodds, was signed after the match and would go on to become 1/3 of Celtic's greatest ever defence, the holy trinity of Shaw, McNair and Dodds. He played that night as a half-back, but it would be as a lightning-quick left-back that he would play his way into Celtic folklore. Celtic had a poor record at Dens Park in this period, and the matches there tended to be rough, bad-tempered affairs. The season before, Willie Maley had been involved in an on-field altercation with Dundee captain Jack Fraser, in a match in which Celtic ended with 10 men after Peter Summers was forced off with an injury, and for much of the match had only 9 players due to Jimmy Weir leaving the field for 30 minutes with a suspected broken collarbone. He returned to the pitch after a doctor diagnosed merely heavy bruising. Dundee had a very good side and had been Celtic's main rivals for the Championship in the previous 2 seasons. They were in confident mood before the match, and Critic in the Dundee Courier wrote on the 28th of August 1908, "It will be a stirring encounter. The games between the two generally are, and old-time tussles between Dainty and Quinn and Sonny Jim and Fraser will be enjoyed by the crowd. The result will be close, but I am of the opinion Dundee will win. To achieve this, however, their forwards will require to give us a repetition of their Airdrie form. There is nothing to touch them for pretty footwork, and if only they could score, my word, wouldn't we shout." There was speculation in the papers that Alec McNair could make his first appearance of the season after the injury that had kept him out of the Charity Cup final in May and from which he had now recovered. In the event, it was decided that he was not quite ready yet, and Celtic lined up for their first big test of the season. Adams, McLeod, Weir, Young, Loney, Hay, Munro, McMenemy, Quinn, Summers, Hamilton. In a by now depressingly familiar fashion, Celtic went down to their first defeat of the season and their 6th in the previous 7 visits to Dens Park as Dundee stormed into a 2-goal lead at the interval. The Dundee papers were hyperbolic in their praise of the local side, but even the Glasgow Herald of the 31st of August 1908 reported that Dundee deserved the win. "The Celtic visit to Dundee has come to be looked upon as the event of the season on Tayside, and as the home team invariably respond to the feverish anticipation of their following, it is no surprise to find that 7 years have elapsed since victory last inclined to the present champions. Once more Dundee made a supreme and a successful attempt to maintain their successful sequence, and their half-time lead was the outcome of sterling football. Towards the finish of the game, the visitors rallied, and had the referee seen his way to award a penalty kick against one of the home team, there is no saying how the game would have ended." The Dundee Evening Telegraph wrote on the 31st of August 1908, "It was not the result alone on Saturday that was the most pleasing feature to Dundee. It was how the success was brought about. Celtic were well beaten at all points of the game, and the superiority should not be measured by a single goal. During the greater part of the first half, Celtic were under a cloud. Dundee completely overshadowed them, not solely because they had the wind to favour them. The footwork of the forwards was excellent, sufficient to make one imagine that it had been kept up for the Celtic. The breaking up by the 3 half-backs, such as permitted the opposition few opportunities to get through, and with Quinn completely blanketed by Dainty, movements from the centre were non-existent." Critic in the Dundee Courier that same day was even more gushing. "There were great rejoicings at Dens Park on Saturday when referee Tom Robertson's whistle sounded victory for Dundee over their redoubtable opponents, the Celtic. It was a terrific fight, out of which the Dens Parkers came with flying colours. Dundee went off with a bang at the very start, and to say that they were all over the Irishmen in the first half is putting it mildly. They ran the opposing defence off its feet, as it were, and my word, the supporters of the champions did look blue when Dundee put on their second goal. In fact, though it had been 6-0 instead of 2-0 at the interval, Celtic could not have grumbled." In the second half, Celtic looked more like themselves, and when Peter Summers pulled one back with half an hour to play, looked like they were about to stage a comeback. Even the Dundee newspapers acknowledged that they might have deserved a draw had it come. The Dundee Evening Telegraph wrote, "What an inspiring effect had the goal which came to the Celtic after 15 minutes of the second half had gone. Dundee seemed to waver, the forwards lost their dash, while the Celtic quintet came away in surprising fashion and looked as if they were to pull the game out of the fire, or, at all events, prevent defeat. It was touch and go for the equaliser. Indeed, it appeared an absolute certainty when Dainty tackled Quinn, with the latter in excellent position for scoring. Quinn fell and was injured. Was it a penalty? With all due deference to the referee, it looked like one, but as a similar incident happened to Hunter at the other end a minute or 2 later, the sides can cry quits." As well as having the penalty claim turned down, Celtic lost Quinn to injury as a result of Dainty's challenge, and although he returned to the field for the closing minutes, was clearly hampered in his movements and posed no more threat. In the final seconds, Sonny Jim, described in most reports as the best player on the field, powered a header inches over the bar and the points were lost. With most of the Celtic team under par on the day, a few came in for criticism in the newspapers, most noticeably fullback Jimmy Weir, with critic in the Dundee Courier writing, "Weir is not reliable at left back, and I am puzzled to know why the Celtic directors do not play McNair. The latter certainly does not possess a strong kick, but he is as safe as the bank, and that is worth a lot." The other player singled out was the man with the biggest boots in football to fill, Dan Munro. Critic again, "McLeod and Young were the best of the two back divisions, and forward McMenemy worked to greatest advantage. His work was lost on Munro, who is very far behind Bennett as an outside right. If I am not mistaken, Moran will not long be kept out of the team. The Forest mechanic lad is clever enough on the ball, but he is too timid for a team of the build of the Celtic." Critic was proven correct when Martin Moran, who had played a solitary league match for Celtic in 1898 before being released and enjoying a long career in England, and who had been re-signed that summer, came into the side for the following match, which was lost 1-0 at home to St Mirren on the 5th of September 1908. Jimmy Quinn was missing, the injury sustained at Dens Park keeping him out for more than a month, and even allowing for a tremendous display by the St Mirren goalkeeper, it was a demoralising defeat, coming straight after the reversal at Dundee. It also left Celtic languishing in 7th place, with only 4 points from 4 matches, 5 behind early leaders Clyde with 9 points from 5 games, Rangers with a 100% record in 2nd place with 8 from 4 matches, and Dundee in 3rd place with 7 points from 4 matches. There would be no immediate bounce back in the league either, with the next 3 Saturdays taken up by Glasgow Cup ties. A 4-4 draw at Hampden against Queen's Park was followed up by a 2-1 win in the replay at Celtic Park before the visit of Rangers in the semi-final on the 28th of September 1908. Jimmy Quinn made his return from injury and they opened the scoring in the 15th minute through Davy Hamilton. But then came the inevitable and heart-wrenching sight of Alec Bennett not only equalising for Rangers shortly before half-time, but also putting them ahead just after the hour mark. Jimmy Hay missed a penalty for the second week in a row 10 minutes later, but almost immediately afterwards, Peter Summers struck to take the tie to a replay. Third Lanark were beaten 1-0 at Celtic Park on Monday the 28th of September as league matches were squeezed in on the bank holiday weekend, Davy Hamilton the scorer. But at the end of September, Celtic had dropped to 12th place in the league with 6 points from 5 games, 7 points behind leaders Rangers, who had played 2 games more. Dundee were 2 points behind Rangers in 3rd place, having played 1 game more. Nothing could be done to rectify this situation yet, as the Glasgow Cup semi-final replay against Rangers was scheduled for the 3rd of October 1908 at Ibrox. The Scottish referee wrote in its preview on the 2nd of October 1908, "The Glasgow Cup replay at Ibrox tomorrow afternoon should be every bit as close and exciting as the first encounter at Parkhead a week ago. Celts were, if anything, the smarter combination last Saturday, the forwards being particularly clever and effective, and despite the fact that they are playing away from home, they should make a great show and run the Light Blues to a close finish. It is, of course, impossible to say which side will survive. It will be keen, dour and determined play all the way, with little between them at the finish." The Celtic team was beginning to settle again, with Alec McNair now playing regularly at fullback, and Jimmy Quinn returned, although he had been rested against Third Lanark on the Monday afternoon, and Willie Kivlikin had now taken up the outside right position. In that same edition on the 2nd of October, the Scottish referee had 2 adverts running alongside each other, with Lumley's and Charlton's both still insisting that they were the providers of Celtic strips for the season. The Daily Record and Mail reported on a significant change in the Celtic lineup on the morning of the match and provides another hint that the playing side of the club was not run solely by Willie Maley at this point. "At the deferred meeting of the Celtic directors held last night, the back division was under review and it was decided to revert to the defence that represented the club in the replay with Queen's Park. Hay has been drawn from the half-back line to partner McNair at full-back and we're left out while Mitchell is introduced at left half. Thus, for the second year in succession, the Celts have dropped the regular backs in the cup ties against the Light Blues and called in the ablest of the half-backs to do duty at back. Interest in the event has increased during the week, and the brilliant weather ensures a fast surface and the prospect of keener play. Form gives no indication of the probable result, and victory is within the grasp of either. Quinn is a certain starter, and the week's training should be all in his favour. On an unseasonably hot day, Celtic finally seemed to be rediscovering their old form and blew away a Rangers team containing 3 ex-Celts, with 2 first-half goals from Peter Summers and Jimmy Quinn. The Daily Record and Mail of the 5th of October 1908 declared, "Celts still the leading team in Glasgow." The paper reported, "Better methods all round accounted for the supremacy of the Celts, and they had what little luck was going early in the game when a goal meant so much. While their opponents were struggling to strike combination, they moved with a complete understanding, and a cooperation existed between the halfbacks and forwards that the Rangers never attempted to carry out. A goal after 3 minutes did much to steady and give confidence to the Celts. It was smartly taken by Summers with a pot shot off a simple free kick given against Galt, who was penalised for a faulty throw-in. The second goal was a masterpiece from Quinn in the centre's happiest style. Slipping past the vigilant half-backs, who shadowed him faithfully, he dashed between the backs and, racing on, let drive with a terrific shot which Rennie could not parry." Celtic contented themselves with protecting their lead in the second half, especially after Quinn, still feeling the effects of his Dens Park injury, broke down in the second half. The Daily Record and Mail reporting, "Quinn went lame in the second half and contented himself with heading the ball or slipping it out to the wings." The win took Celtic into the Glasgow Cup final for the 5th year in succession, and with 4 consecutive wins already under their belt, they were confident of retaining it in the final against whoever emerged from the other semi-final between Third Lanark and Clyde. Before the final, there was a chance to take revenge on Dundee as they finally got back to league action at Celtic Park on the 10th of October 1908. The sting of repeated defeats on Tayside was still being felt keenly, and in the Scottish referee of the 5th of October 1908, a wag had sent in a possibly apocryphal tale reproduced on page 5. "At a recent examination in a Glasgow school board, the inspector was examining a 4th standard class in geography. Pointing to the first boy, he asked, 'What is Glasgow famous for?' 'Shipbuilding and steelwork, sir,' was the reply. 'Very good,' said the inspector. Turning to the second boy, he said, 'Now, my little man, what is Dundee famous for?' 'Beating the Celtic,' yelled a bright boy of 7 from the bottom of the class. In brackets, collapse of the inspector. Sent by R. McG, Glasgow. Celtic seized this opportunity for revenge with both hands, and their 2-0 win hardly reflected the one-sided nature of the match, with the Scottish referee of the 12th of October 1908 writing, "Celtic had their revenge on Dundee, and after the first 20 minutes could have won as they liked." With the departure of Alec Bennett and concerns over the form of MacLeod and Weir at fullback, changes were being effected in the Celtic team, who retained McNair and Hay at fullback and gave a competitive debut to Joe Dodds, who played at centre-half, with John Mitchell continuing at left-half and Willie Kivlikin at outside right. The Scottish referee of the 12th of October 1908 reported, "McNair and Hay were a difficult pair to beat. It is now hard to say whether Hay excels most as a half or as a fullback, so well has he filled both positions. McNair's versatility is too well known to require further elaboration. Dodds made an excellent shape at centre-half. He has youth on his side, plenty of energy, and a fine notion of the duties devolving on a centre-half. His general excellence was no doubt a reason for the partial collapse of Hunter." Critic in the Dundee Courier, almost as fulsome in his praise of Celtic as he had been of Dundee after their recent win at Dens Park, took a similar view. "A strong, bustling 11, Celtic will take a lot of beating now that they have found their proper bearings. McNair is value for his position at right back, if only by his ability as a tackler. There is no rushing in with him. He usually waits for an opponent and then closes in upon him. This was where he always got the better of McCann. Mitchell is a good wing half and, as with Dodds, shows the ability of manager Maley in picking up young talent." The day was a triumph for the wingers. Willie Kivlican and especially Davy Hamilton, who played what some consider his best ever match, scoring both goals on the day. Things now seem to be looking up for Celtic again, although they were still only in 10th place with 8 points from 6 matches. Rangers lost 4-3 to Airdrieonians, allowing Aberdeen, for the first time in their history, to top the table with 15 points, although they had played a game more than second place St Mirren on 14 points and 2 games more than Rangers in third on 13 points. Dundee were also on 13 points, but had played the same number of games as leaders Aberdeen. The league campaign was then put on hold for another couple of weeks as the Glasgow Cup final, as it did the previous season against Rangers, once again took 3 attempts to resolve, but this time it ended in crashing disappointment. The first instalment took place in front of 22,000 spectators at Hampden Park on the 17th of October 1908, and but for an inspirational performance from Thirds goalkeeper Jimmy Brownlie, would have been all over as a contest by half-time. Brownlie continued to defy Celtic in the second half, and after Jimmy Quinn finally broke the deadlock on the hour mark, Thirds managed to score with a sucker punch 10 minutes from time, and the match was taken to a replay on the following Saturday. The Daily Record and Mail reported on the 19th of October 1908, "I have seen all the Third Lanark goalkeepers from the early days when Wallace guarded the uprights. One recalls subsequently the late Robert Downey, Sidney Ross and James Rayside, now of Bury, as outstanding Cathkin Park custodians. The brilliant performances of these accomplished players, however, were surpassed on Saturday at Hampden Park when Brownlie defied the Celtic team in the final for the Glasgow Cup in a game largely defensive on the part of the Third Lanark. The tale of this 20-second final may be summed up as the tale of a goalkeeper's brilliance. The Celts had out their full team, the side played skillful and attractive football, and there was no falling off in their shooting. All round they played like a winning team in the first half and tested the goalkeeper by every wile and art they knew, but Brownlie was unbeatable. At the interval, he was cheered from all parts as he retired, and the tribute came from all sides of the field in acknowledgement of the great part he played in keeping the Celts out." The replay, on the 24th of October 1908, saw Brownlie fall short of the standards he set in the first match, conceding a goal in the 10th minute to a Jimmy McMenemy shot, which he had managed to get both hands on, but which squirmed into the net. By then, though, Thirds had already taken the lead and went ahead again on the half-hour mark before Peter Summers notched a second equaliser just before half-time. The second half was scoreless, with both teams missing good chances, and a second replay was needed in midweek. The third match in this final series delivered as big a cup shock as had ever been seen in the competition, with Third Lanark eventually running out 4-0 winners to prevent Celtic winning the competition for a 5th consecutive season. They scored a third-minute opener and then withstood a siege from Celtic over the following quarter of an hour, with Brownlie once again excelling in goal. Then disaster struck when Davy Hamilton was injured and had to leave the field. The Daily Record and Mail wrote on the 29th of October 1908, "There is this to be said for the Celtic, that they were handicapped by the absence of Hamilton, who had to retire owing to an injury. The little outside left, in an attempt to kick the ball from Brownlie's hands, fell heavily against the post. He turned out in the second half after having been off for half an hour, but he was of no use whatsoever and returned to the pavilion again after a futile attempt to assist his comrades." The Third Lanark team played the game of their lives in this second replay and were already ahead by the time Hamilton went off injured, and they fully deserved their win, which saw Celtic lose their grip on the Glasgow Cup and the first of the 4 trophies they had won the season before. Having all but monopolised the major honours for a couple of seasons, it was inevitable that this day would have come, but it was still hard to take, and there was a feeling that cracks were beginning to appear in Celtic's armour. This feeling was not helped by the league table. After another 2 weeks taken up by the Glasgow Cup, which showed Celtic in 12th place on 8 points from 6 games, although they could still overhaul leaders Aberdeen on 18 points from 12 games. Rangers were only a point behind Aberdeen, having played 2 matches fewer, so they could potentially move even further ahead of the Dons than Celtic could. The first step to remedying the situation came at Sheffield a few days after the Glasgow Cup final on the 31st of October 1908. Clyde were by no means pushovers, and were the last remaining undefeated team in the league. The assignment was made no easier by the absence of Davy Hamilton, still feeling the effects of his collision with the goalpost. The forward line had an unfamiliar look about it, with Dan Munro back at outside right, young Davy McLean in the centre, and Jimmy Quinn filling in for Hamilton at outside left. It was a day not so much about turning on the style, as simply getting the club back on track after the huge disappointment of the Glasgow Cup loss, and this they duly did, although not without controversy. The Daily Record and Mail reported on the 2nd of November 1908, "The Celts' rearranged team distinguished itself at Shawfield by defeating the hitherto only unbeaten club in the league, after a game which at the opening held out the promise of much good play, but wound up with a display of physicalism that kept the 18,000 spectators in the throes of excitement." The first half was frantic and evenly contested, with only Jimmy McMenemy bringing any calmness to the match, and it was Napoleon who opened the scoring after the goalkeeper could only parry a Jimmy Quinn shot his way. Soon after the restart, Robertson of Clyde had to leave the field with an injured shoulder, later diagnosed as a fractured collarbone. He actually came back on to finish the match, but was in obvious pain. The Daily Record and Mail reported, "Early in the second half, Robertson of the Clyde had his shoulder injured and had to leave the field for a time. After his return, McLean headed a fine centre from the left, but the goal decision did not satisfy the onlookers, and for a bit the referee had a bad time." The Glasgow Herald of the 2nd of November 1908 suggested the onlookers had a point. "Quinn and Summers brought about a second goal, but McLean, who headed through, was yards offside, and it was surprising that the point was allowed to stand." Tempers became frayed after McLean's goal, and play soon became bogged down in midfield, but Celtic came closer to scoring on 2 occasions through Summers and Quinn. It was mission accomplished for Celtic, who moved up 2 places in the table to 10th place, while Glasgow Cup winners Third Lanark took a point off Rangers in a 2-2 draw at Ibrox. The win at Shawfield was the first of 8 wins in a row, including a first ever league win at Pittodrie, where Aberdeen were beaten 2-0 on the 19th of December, before the last match of the calendar year was lost 1-0 in the return match with Clyde at Celtic Park on the 26th of December 1908. The winning run saw Celtic reach 4th in the table by the turn of the year, with 24 points from 15 matches and 4 games in hand on leaders Rangers, who had 30 points from 19 games. The New Year meeting with Rangers wasn't quite a must-win match for Celtic, but it was one they could not afford to lose against their old rivals, who were mounting a serious title challenge for the first time since they were beaten in a playoff match for the championship at Hampden in 1905. For the second time that season, they outclassed Rangers at Ibrox and ran out comfortable 3-1 winners. Davy Hamilton kept up his phenomenal scoring record against the Ibrox club, opening the scoring in the 4th minute from a clever pass by Peter Summers, and they proceeded to turn in a masterclass that should have seen them out of sight by half-time. The Daily Record and Mail reported on the 2nd of January 1909, "Not since the late George Allen, who gained an international cap against England while a member of the Liverpool FC was seen in the Celtic ranks in a match at Ibrox Park, have the league champions so dwarfed their city rivals in all-round play as was the case yesterday. For combined action, strength behind and method, the comparison favoured the Celts, who delighted their supporters by an overpowering display of effective football. In no division were they compelled to play second fiddle. Forward and at half-back, the Celts were immeasurably superior, and all through they played like a winning team. The absence of Young from the middle line, on account of an ankle hurt, was never felt, so well did the Carluke youngster Dodds acquit himself." George Allen played for Celtic for a single season in 1897-98, scoring 15 goals in 17 league games before returning to Liverpool. His time at Celtic is covered in Celtic in Person Volume 2, Willie Orr Part 1. He tragically contracted tuberculosis shortly after returning to Liverpool and died at the age of just 24 in October 1899. The Record's appraisal of Dodds was supported in the Dundee Courier, whose correspondent picked him out for special praise on the 2nd of January 1909. "A feature of Celtic's play was the heady work of Dodds at right half. I cannot see how Young can displace this lad, for his game could stand a microscopic inspection, and he has all the touches besides having the seeing eye for goal. Into the second half at Ibrox, Celtic finally scored the goals their play deserved. McMenemy heading in the second, and Dan Munro blasting into the net from another perfectly weighted Peter Summers pass. Satisfyingly, Jimmy Weir completely shackled Alec Bennett, who contributed little of note on the day. There was a nasty incident during the match, which led to an injury to Rangers honorary president Sir John Ure Primrose, described in the Daily Record and Mail of the 2nd of January 1909. Sir John Ure Primrose, Baronet, had an unpleasant experience yesterday when attending the football match between the Rangers and Celtic at Ibrox Park. When the collection at half-time was being taken, a man, in a moment of anger, snatched the box from the hands of a collector and threw it away from the grandstand into the pavilion enclosure. The heavy box crashed down against a man's hat and then struck Sir John at the back of the ear, inflicting a nasty cut. Sir John, though the wound bled profusely, states that he suffered little pain. He was able to walk home and, with the exception of having a headache during the evening, was, fortunately, none the worse. The police succeeded in finding the man who had thrown the box. It is characteristic of Glasgow's late Lord Provost that though he was urged to prosecute, he refused to do so. "I had no wish," he remarked to the Daily Record and Mail, "to spoil the poor fellow's holiday." Victory at Ibrox was a real morale booster, with Celtic now only 4 points behind Rangers and Dundee, with 4 games in hand over Rangers and 6 over Dundee. But they came crashing back to earth the following day, when they slumped to a 3-1 defeat away to Kilmarnock, and the following Saturday recorded a 1-1 draw at home to Hearts. For the Kilmarnock match, Sonny Jim returned to the side, but not in his usual place. Davy Adams had been injured in the win at Ibrox, and Young apparently persuaded Willie Maley that he should take over in goal. Most of the newspapers insisted that the defeat could not be attributed to Young, but the Daily Record and Mail did report on the 11th of January 1909. From another raid, Douglas was presented with a chance. He shot feebly, and Young should have cleared. He failed, however. It was his only mistake, and the Kilmarnock centre rushing up bustled the ball through. There appears to have been no reserve goalkeeper at Celtic Park at this time, because the following week Jimmy Oliver, signed on loan from Creetown Volunteers, and who had previously had a loan spell at Morton, was in the side against Hearts. He made one other appearance that season on the 29th of March 1909 in a home win over Partick Thistle, before joining Girvan Athletic when his loan spell ended in the summer. The points dropped against Kilmarnock and Hearts left Celtic 6 points behind leaders Dundee, who had played 3 games more, so there was no need to panic yet, but now attention was turned to the Scottish Cup, which Celtic were hoping to win for a record-equalling 3rd successive year. Queen's Park won the first 3 Scottish Cups from 1874 to 76, followed by Vale of Leven from 1877 to 79, before Queen's Park repeated the feat from 1880 to 82. But since then, no one had equalled their achievements. Celtic had previously won the Cup in 1899 and 1900 before losing the 1901 final to Hearts. Having relinquished the Glasgow Cup after so long, they were even more determined than ever to win the Scottish Cup this season. The campaign opened with a now rare trip to Logie Green to play Leith Athletic, Jimmy Quinn scoring a hat-trick in a 4-2 win. A run of wins in both the league and the cup followed, with 8 goals scored for the loss of only 1 against Port Glasgow Athletic on consecutive weeks, 4-0 in the Scottish Cup at Celtic Park and 4-1 in the league at Clune Park. The good run continued until a disappointing 3-2 defeat to Rangers in the league at Celtic Park on the 13th of March 1909, where, after Dan Munro had opened the scoring, Rangers hit back and were 3-1 ahead just after the hour mark. Jimmy Quinn's last-minute goal added no more than a veneer of respectability to the scoreline. Dundee now led the table on 44 points from 30 games. Rangers were second on 37 points from 26 games, while Celtic were third on 34 points from 23 games. Both Glasgow clubs could still overhaul Dundee, and Celtic were potentially 3 points better off than Rangers. But it must have been a concern to note the goals for and against column at this stage of the season, Dundee having scored 64 and Rangers 73 to Celtic's 49. Celtic's strength was clearly now in defence, with Dundee having conceded 32, Rangers 29 and Celtic only 18. The effects of Alec Bennett's move across the city were manifest. It took Celtic 2 attempts to dispose of Clyde in the Scottish Cup semi-final, winning 2-0 at Celtic Park on the 27th of March after a 0-0 draw the week before. 1-0 league wins over Partick Thistle and St Mirren followed before they met Rangers for the Scottish Cup final on the 10th of April 1909. A curious passage appeared in the Scottish Referee on the 9th of April 1909, the day before the final. Both clubs have won it twice in succession, Rangers 1897-98 and Celts 1907-08, so that no matter who wins tomorrow, the winner will equal the feat of Queen's Park and Vale of Leven in winning the Cup 3 years in succession. Having not won the Scottish Cup since 1903, it's unclear how a win in the 1909 final would have constituted 3 in a row for Rangers. But we have seen their successor club credited with 55 league titles after winning it once, so perhaps the normal rules of arithmetic do not apply to Rangers-branded clubs. The first half was dominated by Celtic, who took a 1-0 lead through Jimmy Quinn in the 23rd minute. Alec McNair played a long pass over the top and Quinn outpaced the Rangers defenders while their goalkeeper, Harry Rennie, hesitated and stayed on his line. As the ball bounced up, Quinn headed it powerfully past Rennie. They laid siege to the Rangers goal for the rest of the half, with Summers and McMenemy both coming close, but couldn't add to the lead. The game turned in the second half on the decision by the Rangers captain Jimmy Stark to swap the 2 former Celts in his forward line around, Robert Campbell going to outside right and Alec Bennett taking up his position at centre forward. Joe Dodds, selected at centre half for Celtic, had shackled the lumbering Campbell, who had been used as a fullback in his half-season with Celtic in season 1905-06. The youngster found Bennett far harder to pin down. With the game going into its final quarter, Rangers stormed into the lead with 2 goals in 3 minutes, Thomas Gilchrist equalising with a snapshot, and then Alec Bennett scoring the best goal of the day, curling a long-range effort past Davy Adams. It looked at that point as if the Scottish Cup was gone, until a bizarre equaliser for Celtic 5 minutes later, when the Rangers keeper, in saving a shot from Dan Munro, took a step back and over the goal line, as described in the Scottish Referee of the 12th of April 1909. Then came the sensation of the day. Rennie seemed to have saved a shot by Munro, but the referee was seen to point towards the midfield, and it was only then that the spectators at the other end realised that a goal had been scored. The Rangers goalkeeper with the ball in his hand had to dodge Quinn, and in doing so, he carried the ball inside the line. Even the Rangers players admitted that the goal was a legitimate one, although the point was argued all over the city after the match. Both cup finalists drew league matches on the Monday afternoon, Celtic tying 1-1 with Third Lanark at Cathkin Park, and Rangers being held to a 2-2 draw at Ibrox by Clyde. But all eyes were already on the Scottish Cup final replay on the Saturday, which had added yet another match to Celtic's already incredibly crowded fixture schedule. Assuming the Cup final was resolved, they had 8 league matches still to play, and just 11 days to fit them in. Although Celtic could still reach a total of 55 points, 5 more than Dundee on 48 and 1 match remaining, the gruelling series of matches ahead was unlikely to yield full points. Rangers, with only 4 matches still to play, could still reach 52 points. It was a distinct possibility that the Scottish Cup was Celtic's best hope of winning any of the major trophies. With this fixture congestion in mind, Celtic were anxious to have a resolution to the Cup final on the Saturday. The Daily Record and Mail reported on Wednesday the 14th of April 1909. An important decision was arrived at by the directors of the Celtic Club at a meeting held last night, where it was agreed to approach the Scottish Football Association and the Rangers Club with a view to having the match played to a finish on Saturday. With a heavy league programme still to be faced, the desire of the Parkhead management to arrive at a definite conclusion in the final can be easily understood. According to the rules of the association, in the event of a draw, the match would require to be played in the following midweek. But should such an arrangement as that emanating from the Celtic club be come to, there is every possibility of another game being obviated. While extra time had been mooted as a possibility if the replay finished in a draw, no official announcement had been made to that effect in the days before the match. The only official business carried out in the days before the replay appears to have been a meeting of the SFA's Rough Play Committee, at which Falkirk referee J.A. Fakeney was suspended for his lax handling of the Celtic Rangers League match on the 13th of March, and Celtic were instructed to warn Davy Adams against any repeat of his actions in throwing the ball at Thomas Gilchrist after he had been barged by the Rangers forward in the first match at Hampden. Celtic were still without the injured Willie Loney, although the general consensus was that Joe Dodds was a more than adequate replacement. Interestingly, Dodds was reported in the Dundee Courier of the 15th of April 1909 to be holding out for 20 shillings extra on his pay. The paper reported that Celtic were unlikely to meet his demands, citing their refusal to match Alec Bennett's wage demands the previous summer. The only likely change to the Celtic lineup for the replay was Willie Kivlikin for Dan Munro. Rangers, who had doubts over the fitness of several players, including former Celts Campbell and Bennett, splashed out on the Thursday to sign Willie Reid, a Scottish centre-forward from Portsmouth, and while they did not name a team until the day of the match, it was stated that he would definitely be included. The match itself was completely overshadowed by the events that followed it, but Willie Kivlikin did indeed replace Dan Munro at outside right, and it finished in a 1-1 draw. Rangers dominating the first half with the wind behind them, and Jimmy Gordon opening the scoring after 21 minutes, then Celtic taking over in the second half with the wind behind them, and Jimmy Quinn heading an equaliser just after the hour mark from Jimmy Hayes' corner kick. Despite pressing hard for the rest of the half, they could not find a winner, and shortly after the final whistle, all hell broke loose. The causes of the riot that followed the 1909 Scottish Cup final are fairly well known. It had been speculated in many of the newspapers in the week of the match that extra time might be played in the event of a draw, and there was a long-held suspicion that the two clubs frequently tied cup finals in order to generate extra cash from replays. 70,000 spectators had turned up for the first match a week earlier, and well over 60,000 were present for the replay. As we have seen though, another replay was not in Celtic's best interests. They had to fit in 8 league matches over the next 11 days, so a replay was the last thing they wanted, and it had been reported in the week leading up to the final that they had asked for extra time if the match was drawn. Unfortunately, the Scottish Football Association had not taken the time to publicly announce that their rules did not allow for extra time and that there would be a replay if the match was drawn. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 19th of April 1909 reported that no official request was received from Celtic by either the SFA or Rangers, and printed the relevant SFA rule for cup final replays. Half an hour must be played in all matches after the second, and the third and subsequent matches must be played in the week following the second match on a day other than a Saturday until the tie is decided. No deviation from this course shall be allowed, otherwise the committee shall have the power to award the tie to either club. As the final whistle sounded, there was a great deal of uncertainty on the terraces over what would happen next, despite the referee and linesman striding straight off the pitch. Several players from each team lingered on the field, most of them Celts, and this must have added to the expectation amongst a large portion of the crowd that extra time was to be played. The Scottish referee reported on the 19th of April 1909, "The first signs of restlessness, which later developed into riotousness and eventually resulted in a perfect orgy of hooliganism, occurred when the referee's whistle blew for time. The retiral of the referee and linesman for the dressing rooms was the signal for a perfect howl of disapprobation. Shouts of 'play on' were heard all around the arena, and a number of the players hesitated on the field. Their hesitation proved fatal as it turned out. The fact that certain players were evidently willing to play on encouraged the idea in the mind of the spectators that the rules of the association were to be departed from for the first time in the history of the cup competition. The last player had scarcely left the field when the more daring spirits were leaping over the barricades. Like a flock of sheep, the spectators behind poured onto the playing pitch." Critic in the Dundee Courier of the 19th of April 1909 had harsh words for the players who loitered on the pitch, writing that the crowd at once fastened on the hesitancy of the Celtic men as an indication that they might be able to send the teams into the field again. The players finally made their way off the pitch, but, Critic went on, unfortunately, by this time the damage was done. By staying on the field and indicating even a suggestion of the possibility of the game being restarted, the laggard players had imbued those who so soon became an abandoned mob with the idea that extra time could be played if the parties cared. This was entirely wrong. There never was any chance of extra time, and the great blunder lay in the fact of the players not having a full knowledge of this. On the other hand, no player had a right to assume that the game would go on in the absence of explicit information to that effect, and everyone who remained on the field after the referee had walked towards the pavilion has a share in the responsibility for the rioting that ensued. It seems a stretch to say there would have been no riot if not for the players remaining on the pitch. A large percentage of the spectators were already under the impression extra time would be played, and drawn cup matches between the two rivals always led to dark mutterings of fixes for the purpose of extracting more money from the fans for replays. Only the previous season it had taken 3 matches to decide the Glasgow Cup final between the teams, and of course that season's Glasgow Cup final had required 2 replays to separate Celtic and Third Lanark. As the players finally entered the pavilion, spectators began to come onto the pitch and converged in front of the pavilion, their way to which was barred by a handful of police officers who had to be quickly reinforced to stop the crowd forcing their way in. The Daily Record and Mail reported on the 19th of April 1909, "Over the barricades that protect the playing pitch swarmed the unruly mob. They made straight for the centre of the pavilion where the players' exit is. The police, many of whom had pleasantly squatted on the edge of the field of play during the second half of the game, were drawn up to prevent disorder. The field was black with the invaders. Chaos reigned. Hundreds more leapt the barricades. Patiently the police bore the taunts of the mob. By and by stones were thrown. A bottle was hurled at the spot where the cordon of police were drawn. The attempt was made to clear the ground. Batons were drawn as the crowd menacingly surged round the members of the force. Civilians and police were seen to fall. No attempt was made to arrest, simply because the 93 police officers on the scene were hopelessly outnumbered by an estimated 5,000 strong mob, while the majority of the 60,000 plus crowd remained in the ground watching on. As reinforcements were called for, fans began to destroy the goalposts at the traditional Celtic end of the ground in front of the pavilion, while others got hold of a ground roller which they amused themselves with by pushing it up and down the pitch before dismantling it and using the various parts to plough it up. Soon the goalposts at the other end of the pitch were down as well, and rioters attempted to use the posts as battering rams to gain entry to the pavilion. As more police arrived, the rioters were gradually pushed back towards the north terracing, and the ground became littered with wounded police and rioters. Even the arrival of mounted officers did nothing to quell the disorder. The Scotsman reported on the 19th of April 1909, "Acting with commendable patience and restraint, the police force, who were shortly reinforced by the arrival of reserves from almost every district in the city, persevered in their attempt to clear the ground. A number of mounted men were found to be of great assistance, but the mob took a malicious delight in surrounding the horsemen and endeavouring to force them to dismount. They beat man and horse most unmercifully, and in some cases the man was pulled to the ground. Not only had the police to persist in their own work of overcoming the mob, but they had to protect and rescue each other. Where a solitary policeman was trapped, he was dealt with in the most outrageous manner, and it is little wonder that rumour had it that several of them had been killed." It's easy to read of these events over 100 years later and find amusement in the tale, but it is indeed a wonder that no one was killed. With the players having left soon after the final whistle, by most accounts oblivious to what was happening behind them, the pavilion was turned into an impromptu dressing station with a steady supply of wounded, many of them on stretchers, being taken inside for medical treatment. The Dundee Evening Telegraph correspondent, describing the scene as "like a slaughterhouse," wrote on the 19th of April 1909, "Blood was spilt as if it had been water. I saw policeman after policeman carried into the pavilion, cut and bleeding. Several were very badly hurt, their injuries consisting of bottle cuts, knife thrusts, brick bruises, or stick or stone smashes. Several civilians were laid low in trying to help the police. A number of hooligans were smitten by the police. All were tended carefully, and the pavilion turned into a temporary hospital. 2 or 3 constables were very severely injured. Red with blood, I saw them carried in for treatment. One poor fellow had his head laid open, another had his ear severed, one had his eye knocked out, and another had a frightful gash right across his face. After being forced back from the pavilion and towards the north terracing, the mob then began to dismantle the barricades separating it from the pitch and set them on fire. The battle then resumed on the terraces, with the Daily Record and Mail reporting on the 19th of April 1909. The dastardly hooligans had lighted the barricading. Slowly but surely, the flames grew in strength. Boys and youths were seen approaching with fresh fuel torn from the barricading. Oil stolen from the stable on the ground was poured over the fiery pyramid. The heat temporarily drove the hooligans back. The police charged the hill. Momentarily, the crowd seemed checked. As the scattered policemen gained the lofty summit of the terracing, the cowardly hooligans, reinforced from behind, sent volley after volley of stones into their ranks. The police were forced to retreat. Those who fell never rose. Those isolated policemen were surrounded, downed and brutally beaten. A soldier who went to the rescue was shamefully assaulted in a similar manner. As the police again regrouped and began to force rioters back up the terracing, they found a new target for destruction in the shape of the pay boxes at the northwest entrance, and these were soon in flames, with residents of the houses on Somerville Drive now fearing for their safety as fighting spilled onto the street outside the ground. The fire brigade were summoned, and as they attempted to put out the flames, received the same treatment as the police at the hands of the mob. The Daily Record and Mail reported, "The pay boxes were set ablaze with burning brands from the bonfire, and to encourage the fire, some poured whisky over the woodwork of the structures, while a quantity of oil, taken, it is said, from the tool house at Hampden Park, was also sprinkled over the boxes. Thus aided, the flames soon sprang up, and in a short time all the pay boxes were well ablaze. Then came the fire brigade, and the crowd had another chance to display their savagery. The first machine to arrive at Mount Florida could not get near the fire, the mob resisting every attempt made by the men of the brigade. At length, a motor engine arrived and forced its way through the dense throng. The firemen, in face of a fusillade of stones and bottles, succeeded in attaching their hose to the hydrants in the vicinity, and were about to start playing on the flames, when a number of the rioters drew their knives and hacked the hose to pieces, thus frustrating any chance of subduing the conflagration. In the midst of the furious attack made on them, the conduct of the firemen was most admirable, but the force and cowardliness of the rioters were too much for them, and they reluctantly left the scene." Then, the Scottish referee reported, "Assistance was sent for, and soon a force of between 60 and 70 firemen, with 9 motors and engines, were on the scene. Ere their arrival, however, the firemen had the hose run out, but this was immediately cut in pieces, and the firemen driven back by the crowd, who jostled and threw brickbats, road metal, etc. at them, and it was some time before they could attack the fire again. On the arrival of assistance and a large staff of police, the hose was turned on again, and although working under such conditions, the firemen managed to extinguish the flames. The whole of the pay boxes were destroyed, and the damage will amount to £300. Many of the firemen were injured, the most serious being Station Officer John Kennedy, Queen's Park Station, who, on being examined by the doctor, was found to have several broken ribs and to be in a very serious condition." The riot lasted over 2 hours, the mob finally beginning to drift away as darkness fell. By this time, ambulances were beginning to arrive to take the more seriously wounded to city hospitals, and with that the ground began to clear. But even as the rioters departed, they left a trail of destruction behind them, as described in the Daily Record and Mail. "A large section of the mob, after leaving the field, made their way to Bridgeton. The riotous feeling was uppermost, and as soon as they got to Hanging Shaw Road, they smashed a number of dwelling houses. Everyone seemed to carry a weapon of some kind, a thick stick or a piece of iron, while stones were gathered on the way. Each lamp post from Prospect Hill Road into Palmady Road was broken, one of the side streets being left in total darkness. There are few houses until Palmady is reached, and here the howling mob in their mad rush threw the residents into a state of wild excitement. Fortunately, the crowd kept on the move, and by the time they got into the busier thoroughfares, they ceased their destructive work. Apart from the broken windows, over 50 street lamps were smashed. No attempt was made to stop the crowd, which was several hundred strong. As the dust settled, a shocked nation took stock of the events of the 1909 Scottish Cup final replay over the following days. The Daily Record and Mail called it the most fiendish outburst of inflamed passion ever seen in a civilised country. The Scotsman of the 19th of April 1909 reported on the scene on the Sunday morning. All day yesterday, crowds of people flocked to Mount Florida to view the scene. Overnight, there were posted on the ground 30 constables in case of the eventuality of the return of the mob. A force of police still guarded the grounds yesterday, and the public were rigidly excluded from it. Early in the morning, the services of a number of joiners had been requisitioned, and the barricading and shattered gates set to right as much as possible. Notwithstanding their exertions, however, the place presented a sorry sight. All the woodwork at the Somerville Drive entrances had been burned away or remains charred, and what is left is a mass of torn, twisted or bent galvanised iron. The enclosure itself is a litter of stones and broken bottles and scarred patches where the fire has been at work. All the public lamps in the vicinity have been smashed. Only the roughest estimate can be obtained of the amount which will be required to set the place to rights, but £800 is considered a moderate figure. The Scotsman also speculated on the question of a second replay, which was to be decided at an emergency meeting of the SFA on the Monday evening. But this was already a moot point. Celtic and Rangers directors had already met on the Sunday evening and agreed that there would be no third game. The Dundee Evening Telegraph reported on the 19th of April 1909. The Celtic and Rangers directors, at a meeting last night at which the extraordinary situation created by the riot was discussed, agreed to ask the press to publish the following. The directors of Celtic FC and Rangers FC desire to make the following statement with reference to the final tie on Saturday last. Although it was mooted during the week that extra time might be played in the event of a draw, it was found that the Cup competition rules prevented this. On account of the regrettable occurrences on Saturday, both clubs agreed to petition the association that the final tie be abandoned. Signed on behalf of Celtic FC, T. Colgan, J. McKillop. Signed on behalf of Rangers FC, A.B. Mackenzie, J. McPherson. April 18th, 1909. The appearance of this statement in the press, without consulting the SFA, did not go down too well with the association, but at a lively meeting that evening, the committee decided that the correct course of action was to abandon the final and withhold the Scottish Cup for the season. So it was that Celtic lost the second of the trophies they had won in their all-conquering season 1907-08 and were once again denied that much sought-after third consecutive Scottish Cup win. Despite numerous consecutive wins over the next century, they would not win the Scottish Cup 3 years in succession until the treble-treble triumph of season 2018-19. That win made Celtic the fifth team to win 3 consecutive Scottish Cups, behind Queen's Park, Vale of Leven, Rangers and Aberdeen. They surpassed those the following year when Christopher Ayer's decisive spot kick in a penalty shootout against Hearts won the Scottish Cup for the 4th year in succession in 2020. While the fallout from the Hampden riot rumbled on for some time, on the pitch, Celtic now turned all their attention to the business of retaining the league championship, and with 8 games to be negotiated in just 11 days, the odds of achieving this were increasingly long. The first step was taken on the Monday, and it couldn't have been a tougher assignment, away to Hearts on the 19th of April 1909. Due to postponements, this was Celtic's first visit to Edinburgh of the season, and they defeated Hearts 2-1, Jimmy McMenemy scoring both goals before half-time. Rangers were also in Edinburgh that day and crashed to a 1-0 defeat to Hibernian, badly damaging their title ambitions. 2 days later, Wednesday the 21st of April 1909, Celtic were straight back into action at home to Hamilton Academical. In this, their third game in 5 days, they dropped a crucial point after passing up a host of first-half chances, including a missed penalty by Jimmy Quinn. Against the wind in the second half, Celtic conceded an opener on 55 minutes, but scored a disputed equaliser 10 minutes later, the referee adjudging the goalkeeper to have stepped into his net as he held a Quinn header. Next up, 24 hours later, Morton were the visitors at Celtic Park, and despite the fatigue that must have been felt in a very small playing pool, Celtic ran out 5-1 winners. A loan signing from Hamilton, John Atkinson, made his only appearance for the club and scored 2 goals, also laying on another for Dan Munro, as 5 points were secured from the 3 midweek games following the cup final replay. Saturday the 24th of April 1909 proved to be a hugely significant day in the title race, with Rangers seeing their challenge ended by a 1-0 defeat to third Lanark at Cathkin Park, while Dundee defeated Queen's Park 2-0 at Ibrox, Hampden still out of action following the cup final riot in their final match of the season. Unfortunately, Celtic could not find a way past a resolute Erdrionians defence at Celtic Park and dropped another vital point in a scoreless draw. The day's action left Celtic with a definite target to aim for. Dundee finished on 50 points, while Celtic, with 4 games remaining, were on 45 points, so they could reach a total of 53. Their remaining programme was Motherwell home, Queen's Park away, Hibernian away and Hamilton Academical away. The Daily Record and Mail wrote on the 26th of April 1909, "Under ordinary circumstances, one would have little hesitation in plumping for another honour for the Celtic club. But the conditions under which they are labouring in an endeavour to finish at the top are not at all normal. For a club which has played practically the same 11 players throughout the season to cover 4 matches in 5 days, and that after playing 4 within the previous 8 days, the task requires almost superhuman effort to bring about successful accomplishment, and it is that condition of affairs that makes the ultimate issue doubtful, and promises to keep alive the interest until the very day upon which the official season closes." In the first of those games, Monday the 26th of April, a Jimmy Quinn hat-trick and another from Davy McLean saw off Motherwell in a 4-0 victory at Celtic Park, followed by a 5-0 win over Queen's Park, this time Queens switching the match to their former home of Cathkin Park on Wednesday the 28th of April 1909. Jimmy Quinn scored his second hat-trick in 3 days, with Davy McLean this time adding 2, and the unlikely now seemed eminently possible. On 49 points to Dundee's 51, Celtic now required 2 points from their last 2 games to retain the championship and win it for a record 5th time in succession. Agonisingly, they lost 1-0 to Hibernian at Easter Road in the first of those games on Thursday the 29th of April 1909. They conceded a goal on 15 minutes, then on a pitch heavy and cloying after a torrential downpour before kick-off, they threw everything at the Hibernian defence but could not find a way through. This result left them requiring an away win over Hamilton 24 hours later to retain the championship, while a defeat would hand the title to Dundee for the first time in their history. What would happen in the event of a draw was not clear. Celtic had a vastly superior goal difference and goal average to Dundee, but as neither of these was yet in use in Scotland, the rules provided for a play-off for the title. But the season officially ended on the 30th of April, aside from charity matches, so it was by no means certain that this would happen. The Dundee Evening Telegraph wrote on the 30th of April 1909, "If they draw, then what will happen? Celtic and Dundee will be equal in pointage. The rules provide for the playing off of a game in the event of a tie, goal average not counting in Scotland. But as the season closes tonight, it will be impossible for Dundee and Celtic to play off except on behalf of charity. Of course, the League Committee may decide that it be held jointly, or the clubs play off at the beginning of next season. What would Dundee not give to recover those 2 points, the only 2 at home this season they dropped to Greenock Morton?" The Dundee Evening Telegraph also went on to bemoan the different lineups sent out by Queen's Park in their recent games against Dundee and Celtic, more or less explicitly saying Queen's wanted to help Celtic to the title. "Celtic undoubtedly have had a busy week, but the games have not all been of the character as that at Easter Road last night. For instance, that against Queen's Park was practically a walkover. Compare the teams that amateurs turned out against Dundee at Ibrox last Saturday with that which played v Celtic at Cathkin on Wednesday, and one can come to no other conclusion than that the Queens were particularly anxious to beat Dundee, but not Celtic. It is about time the Scottish League was bringing into operation the rule that insists on all teams being at full strength in league games and inflicting punishments like those passed by the English body on clubs who violate the bylaws, as Queens did last week. Celtic lined up for their last final push for the title at Hamilton on Friday the 30th of April 1909. Adams, McNair, Weir, Young, Dodds, Hay, McLean, McMenemy, Quinn, Summers, Hamilton. Celtic opened strongly but were unable to put the finishing touch to any of their attacking moves, with the Hamilton Herald and Lanarkshire Weekly News of the 1st of May 1909 hinting at an understandable nervousness creeping into their play before they broke the deadlock in the 25th minute. There was plenty of excitement amongst the spectators and every bit of clever play was applauded. The Celtic forwards were putting in plenty of clever work, but anxiety was soon in the movements of several of the players. Brownlee cleared a dangerous ball from McMenemy, but soon after a cross from the Celtic right dropped at Hamilton's foot in front of Mason, and the left winger, unmarked, had no difficulty in giving his side the lead amid great cheering. Shortly after the opening goal, Jimmy Quinn was injured and swapped places with outside right Davy McLean, who missed a good chance minutes later. Other opportunities were missed by both Hamilton and Summers before the half-time whistle sounded. Celtic doubled their lead with 25 minutes to go, Jimmy McMenemy weaving his way through a couple of challenges before angling a low drive into the bottom corner. Aki scored in the last minute, but by then the title was secured. The Hamilton Herald and Lanarkshire Weekly News reported, "The Celts went to Mason's End on resuming, but there was no further scoring. A keen and interesting game ending in favour of the green and white jerseys by 2-1. The victory, of course, carrying with it the league championship of 1908-1909. Both teams had a great reception on leaving the field, the champions being loudly cheered." It had been a long, gruelling campaign, and this final match was the first time in the entire season that Celtic had topped the league. But this was due simply to a pile-up of fixtures caused by repeated cup replays over the course of the season. There was no doubt that they were worthy champions, and the horrendous schedule they faced in 11 days after the Scottish Cup final made it quite a remarkable achievement in the end. The Scottish referee of the 1st of May 1909 summed it up. "After a record rush for the top of the ladder, Celts now proudly pose there as champions and banner winners and bearers for 5 solid successive years, which is not only a Scottish, but a World's League record. The wonder of their performance is not alone its sustained consistency since they started the rush and race of 8 matches in 14 days, but the sustained form of these 5 strenuous years." The paper went on to list the league and cup wins of the previous 5 years with a comparison of the 11 who won the first of those successive league titles in 1905 and that which clinched the title against Hamilton. These read 1905, Adams, Watson, Orr, McNair, Loney, Hay, Bennett, McMenemy, Quinn, Summers, Hamilton. 1909, Adams, McNair, Weir, Young, Dodds, Hay, McLean, McMenemy, Quinn, Summers, Hamilton. The report went on, "A glance at these names discloses the fact that no less than 7 of this year's champion team were in that of 1905. This constitutes another aspect of their record which all other club managers should consider seriously. Here we have in a large degree the secret of their success, and of that harmony and combination that have led to this in this famous quintet of years." Season 1907-08 was probably the high point of Celtic's 6-in-a-row run of successes, in terms of trophies won, if not performances and statistics. But it was hard to escape the impression that things were changing. This was the first season in that run when there was no cup triumph to go alongside the league title. There were reasons for this, amongst them the withholding of the Scottish Cup after the riot, and in the Glasgow Charity Cup they fielded weakened teams, resulting in a 4-2 defeat to a full-strength Rangers on the 15th of May 1909. But a glance at the league table might have given food for thought. After breaking all scoring records in the previous two campaigns, netting 80 and 86 times respectively, the defection of Alec Bennett was probably not coincidental to a swinging of the scoring pendulum in Rangers' favour. Despite finishing only fourth behind Dundee and Clyde, they had scored 91 league goals in 1908-09 to Celtic's 71. Celtic's success this season was built on a rock-solid defence, which had conceded only 24 goals in 34 league matches. The well-oiled machine of the previous 5 years was showing signs of wear and tear. Alec Bennett, of course, was gone, and of the others, Jimmy Quinn would turn 31 that summer, while Peter Summers and Willie Loney were about to celebrate their 30th birthdays. Jimmy McMenemy was only a few months short of his 29th birthday. That aspect of the team picked out by the Scottish referee as their strength was also their weakness. They were growing old together in an era when a 30-year-old player was much closer to retiral than he would normally be today. The emergence of Joe Dodds had shown Willie Maley had not lost his keen eye for a promising young player, but sooner or later an extensive overhaul would be needed, possibly even as big an overhaul as that carried out at the turn of the century when the present team had finally emerged from several years without trophy success from 1900 to 1904. Next time, we'll cover the last hurrah of the six-in-a-row era and the beginning of a new phase in Celtic's history as the club embarked on a rebuilding process in the difficult years leading up to the First World War.